then probably should have. I'm going to make you a co-host, actually.
Okay.
Okay, chat. I'm trying to shut off the so that it dings every time everybody comes in. Let me
Okay.
suspend. Maybe I'll turn the unmute themselves off. They can start their own video. They can't record to the computer. They can request to record to the computer. They can request to host. Okay, lock meeting. High profile picture participants. Advanced. Let's see. Share. Captures whiteboards. Apps. No, that's good. Oh, let's see. Meeting settings. I'm trying to find meeting settings.
Are you on the browser or
No, I'm on the app.
the app? Hmm. It's usually hard for me to find the settings on the app. I usually go use the browser most
Okay.
of the time. Yeah.
Play audio chime for mute, unmute. No. Keep
Oh,
meeting.
challenge. I did a Zoom commercial signing. Yeah. It says Professor Gitinji is having some issues though. Challenge, they need a Zoom commercial signing. Mm.
Oh, your co-host. You're already Rebecca, Morgridge, Allen, Emmett Allen. Okay. So you're already a co-host. That's good.
Okay.
Adiola, I'm going to admit. Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Host tools. Host tools. Enable waiting room. Yep. Lock meeting. No. Trying to shut off the chime so that when new people enter, that's not going to be distracting. And by the way, we're recording too. You should have seen that. This meeting is being recorded. And AI companion bonds. That works. Show captions. Yep, we want that. Let's see what else. Meeting settings. Here we go. Connected time. That's not what I want. Anybody have a sense of how to shut off the entrance time so when people come in, we're not hearing chimes all the time? Go ahead, Alan. Oh, I need to unmute you, right? Let's see. Unmute. Unmute.
There we go.
Yeah.
I think it's under the participants. Like there should be a three dot menu.
Hello. Can you hear me, Reg?
I can.
I can hear you.
You can or you cannot?
I can hear you. Hi, Reg. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you on my end.
Oh, I think other people
What's
can
going
though.
on?
Yeah, I can.
Inka, can you say something?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you here.
Ah,
What's going on? Should I log out and then log in back?
Yes.
I should log out. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good try.
How do I get out of here?
Advanced. Share captions. Lock meeting. I don't know what that is. Participants. Okay, I don't see that, Alan.
Reginald, why don't you try making me a co-host and I'll look for it, like, because I'm getting a different menu. So if you make me co-host, I'll see different instructions and I'll try to turn that chime off.
Thanks. Okay. Admit. Make co-host. Confirm. And do we have
Hello?
Professor?
Hello?
Hello?
I still can't hear you on my end.
Adiola, I think it's I
Hmm.
have to chat with her.
Let me use my personal computer. Yeah.
And Adiola. Oops. What's going on here?
Okay, Reginald, I muted the sound.
Okay.
Took a little menu diving, but I found it.
Okay, appreciate it. I can't respond to Adiola either. I don't know what's
Adiola, can you hear me? Looks like no. Do you know if she's in the US or not?
she is.
She could try joining by phone, maybe.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. I can't even chat with her though. That's weird.
Huh.
Like I'm trying. Oh, here we go. Join audio by phone or just use the Zoom app on your phone. Okay, I messaged her. And okay, I only see about 10 people on this Zoom meeting room, which is good. I was just a little bit worried about managing, let's say, like 20 different people who I didn't know. So maybe I'll remove some of those controls. What's the update from Professor Kadinji from Peter Yinka?
Yeah, I'm still waiting on his response. I sent him the link again, so hopefully he joins.
Okay, my screen. Okay. Well, it's good to see everybody nonetheless. Very excited for this. I'm going to omit everybody fairly soon. Adiola, I see you there.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you too.
Good. It works now.
Yeah. Let me make sure I have you as a co-host.
Uh, Professor Gitinji is saying he can't, the link isn't redirecting him to this meeting.
Okay.
I don't know what's
Do
happening.
you want to here I can invite him directly,
Okay.
or you could also do that too. Make co-host, confirm. So we have Adiola, co-host. We have me as the host. We have also me as the host. We have Alan as a co-host. Okay. So really just waiting on Professor Gadinji, and then we can go from there. So while it's just us and we're waiting, so the format should be I'm going to introduce Yinka, and then Yinka should introduce his introduction, which is about 20 to 25 minutes. Then we will move to a discussion room to have a quick discussion. Oh, thanks. Thanks for sending a message, Alan.
Yeah.
We'll move to the discussion room and confer about how the questions, how we want to order things and how to propose them. I don't think it's a big secret. We'll just do a first round and talk about if we want to do a second round or how we want to do an additional round. And so we'll come back and do that, and then we'll Yinka will respond to each of the queries, and then we will confer again to discuss, and then come back with the results. Right. So one thing that I wanted to, I guess it also depends if we can get there's a lot of ways I can also just moderate this session. I mean, typically, what I've seen is that the chair kind of serves as a moderator rather than an interlocutor, right? But I think with while we're still waiting on Professor on Peter Kadinji, that we may need me to be a more explicit interlocutor in that route. So what I would maybe let's just figure out now the order if that's fine. And traditionally, I think it would be Alan Mike would go first. I think that would be smart since you are the affiliate,
Sure.
and then Adiola, and then since we don't have Peter Kadinji here right now, we'll assume he'll go third. He might interact with us just through email, and that's fine, right? Or chat if we have to do that, Yinka. Okay. So we'll make sure to get his query, and let's just make that as a contingent. We'll start in a few minutes, let's say in about 3 minutes. If we don't hear from him or he's still having difficulty joining, of course, he can also call by phone, right? He can just call. I don't know how easy that would be, but maybe he can use WhatsApp to call in, right, into the number. And let's just make sure we can copy invite link. I'll get a full invite link with a phone number on there rather than just a URL. That's down for me. Yeah. And show my meeting. Is yeah, let's go here. Participants. Invite. Copy invitation. Yeah, there's a full phone number he can call in, Yinka. And actually, I'm just going to email this to you right now. So if he cannot join us virtually,
Mhm.
maybe he can just call in. Yinka, do that. Yinka, send, send. Okay, cool. And do not disturb is on for me. Okay, great. So I think we're ready. What I'm seeing here, that's what I'm seeing here. And I'm going to stop the screen share. Well, okay, I'm going to invite everybody if we're okay with that. Okay, wonderful. Participants, admit all. Okay, no chiming. Awesome. Thank you, Alan, for doing that.
It is distracting.
Great to see everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being patient as we wait on people to join this session today. We're very excited for Yinka, but just making sure we have all the technicals handled correctly. Okay, and please, as the message states here, stay off camera and mute your microphone until the end. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the dissertation after Yinka has answered questions from the committee. Okay, thank you so much. You are here, you're in the right place. Hola, Yinka, Victor Ajibola's dissertation defense at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name is Associate Professor Reginald Royston. I'm the chair of Yinka's dissertation committee. We have Professor Alan Rubel, who former director of the iSchool, who is also on this great committee, who has evaluated Yinka's dissertation, and Adiola Ajoke, our distinguished colleague in African Cultural Studies, director of the African Languages Program, who's also done a great job of mentoring Yinka in this dissertation. And we are awaiting the participation of Professor Peter Gathinji from the University of Nairobi, a linguist and professor of Kiswahili, who's been a great collaborator and mentor to Yinka in the last 3 years, partnering with him on his field research and the important analytical work being done in this dissertation. So we'll start with an introduction of the dissertation topic from Yinka. Again, the title of the dissertation is Translators as Gig Workers. Re-iterating white-collar work in the era of digital de-professionalization in Kenya. So many ideas to grab onto there. I'll say it again. Translators as gig workers. Re-iterating white-collar work in the era of digital de-professionalization in Kenya. I'm happy to present to you Yinka Ajibola, who will now lead us and talk about his dissertation, provided introduction to the work he's done over the past few years.
Thank you very much, Professor Oreston, for the introduction. A second while I kindly share my screen.
Thank you so much. And I would also encourage you all to, fiddle around with your settings in Zoom so that you could make Yinka, a larger image. Just play with it a little bit while he presents his slides at the same time.
Okay, I'm ready to go, Prof. All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for your time and your presence here today. Over the next 25 minutes, I'll be presenting my dissertation titled Translators as Gig Workers, Reiterating White-Collar Work in the Era of Digital Deprofessionalization in Kenya. And before I begin, I would like to clarify the concept of gig work, which often refers to short-term, task-based work where people are paid per job or per project rather than a fixed salary. And so moving forward, I would like to start with a quote from Julius Nyerere of Tanzania in the year 1967. It said, "Development is shaped by people, not by money. Money and the wealth it represents is the result and not the basis of development." And when thinking about this quote by Nyerere, to me it sounded a bit radical as at that time, particularly because majority of African countries back then were just coming out of colonialism, were just gaining independence as at that time. And the world measured development using GDPs back then. And in my humble opinion, I think Nyerere was just ahead of his time. He thought about the people, not just the numbers, and he also realized the importance of humans in that process as well. As I transition into work in Africa, right, we all work. Work has not disappeared, but it has shifted, it has transformed. Looking at digital platforms, for example, Upwork and Fiverr, they've opened new pathways into global labor markets. But despite this expansion as well, you can see that it's also created a little bit of inequalities as well. And so when we're looking at it from a broader perspective, a much more broader level, the technology and economy are deeply intertwined in shaping development, and they move together, reinforcing each other in ways that can either expand or it can either limit the opportunities as well. And for example, when looking at platforms, platforms may expand access to work, but the economic conditions determine who can actually benefit from it. And if we hone in specifically on Kenya, where the unemployment rate is high, so about 13%, a lot of people have turned into gig work as an alternative. But then, despite the rising platform revenues globally, many Kenyan gig workers still earn below the living wage. And so this shows that digital platform, they do have the potential to contribute to development, but only when the economic structures ensure that the values reaches the people that produce it. And so moving forward, here's actually what's happening in Kenya. Like I said, the Kenyan translators are not being replaced. They are essentially being pushed into gig work with less stability, with less protections. And the very tools, the technological tools meant to support them. So in this case specifically, I'm talking about the CAT tools, which are computer assisted technologies, which are softwares that help translators move more efficiently with multilingual content. They are primarily designed for European languages and they do not fully support a language like Swahili, and they also miss critical cultural context. And in addition to that, we're talking about artificial intelligence, AI compounding this problem as well. In some instances, you often see that this generative AI or AI as an umbrella, they often produce fluent, but they often produce fluent sentences sometimes, but then in it contains a little bit of subtle errors as well. And so when you look at this from this perspective, it does leave the translators to choose between spending time on corrections or avoiding the tools altogether, risking their competitive edge. Now, just to briefly talk about my theoretical framework here to make it broadly understood, I adopt Dorothea Klein's choice framework, and this framework is a way of understanding development by looking at people's ability to make choices and turn these choices into the real outcomes. And Klein asks one question that does access to technology actually improve someone's life? And she does argue that the answer depends much more than the opportunity it presents. It depends on both the structure, as you can see on the screen, the structure and the agency as well. And when you're talking about the structure within this context, the structure is the environment people live in. So we are talking about the institutions, we're talking about the infrastructures, we're talking about the societal norms around that. And also in this case, to emphasize on agency, agency is the ability of an individual, or in this case, translators, to make meaningful choices about their work. Now, Klein says that, yes, while all these are important, the degree of empowerment is actually where everything ticks. And by this, Klein says, in order to realize these degrees of empowerment, first, the person must know that a choice exists. Then they must see it as a real option. Afterwards, they must be able to act on it. And finally, the action must lead to something actionable and something much more meaningful. And so when you look at the choice framework, it's not linear, in essence, it's multi-directional. And when you look at structural platforms like Fiverr or Upwork, they can enable and they can also limit agency at the same time, even if that shapes what people see as acceptable choices as well. So for example, let's give a practical example here. So on a gig platform, for example, like I said, it has the ability to expand, it has the ability to restrain as well. And it also has the ability to connect translators, for example, to global clients, so people can hop on. And the ability to expose people to the global client enhances their agency. But at the same time, when you think about the algorithms also has the potential of controlling their visibility and also the pricing, so how much they get paid, which can also limit the opportunities as well. So over time, workers, quote unquote, might be willing to accept lower pay because those are only the viable options for them. So the key point here is that it's not just about having the choices, but how these choices are shaped and what they lead to over time. And so moving on to my research question, my central question asks how digital work and technology are shaping gig work as a pathway for socioeconomic development in Kenya. And to answer that, I look at three components. So first, the people, right? Can gig workers actually sustain and advance through this work? And secondly, looking at the tools. So by this, I'm talking about the translation tools, CAT tool more specifically. Are they designed for the reality Kenyan translators work in? And thirdly, talking about the AI paradox, is AI helping or hurting them? Now, just setting a little bit of the stage of how my dissertation went in Kenya, I conducted 3 field trips to Kenya between 2023 and 2025, working across Nairobi, Nyeri, and Kakamega. So these are cities in Nairobi, with full IRB approval from the University of Wisconsin and African International University in Kenya as well. And each research question has its own design, ranging from the interviews, surveys, and evaluations. And they also have their respective analytical approaches as well. Before I continue, for full disclosure, so to protect my participant privacy, all the names you will see in these presentations are merely pseudonyms. So these are not the participants' real names. Moving on to my first research question. So to address my first question, about the extent to which their resources sustain over the short and the long run, I used a qualitative research design based on interviews, so semi-structured in-person interviews. And I interviewed 14 Kenyan translators, gig translators. They were from Nairobi, Nyeri, and Kakamega as well. And the participants were recruited via LinkedIn and via X, formerly Twitter. And I also employed some snowballing techniques as well by pursuing existing recommendations from my existing networks as well. And the reason I chose the semi-structured interview was because um, it helped me with the comparability across the participants, right? So while still being flexible to explore other questions as well. And to move forward with some of my findings, five key patterns emerge from this finding, but I will just focus on two main ones here. And the first one I want to focus on is on certification barriers. So in Kenya, many translators still depend on Western certifications to signify credibility. So this ultimately does create a lot of mismatch because the certification and the actual translations needed within the context of English to Swahili, they are different. And so while the certifications may not always improve the practical translation from English, particularly to Swahili, they still matter because they enhance the visibility of these translators on global platforms like Fiverr, and they also help to attract global clients as well. So in an ideal situation, the certification should be regional, it should be grounded and better aligned with the specific language pairs that they're working with. Secondly, I would like to talk about the time constraints. Yes, we know that gig work is priced on flexibility, but within this case, we're also talking about the algorithms as well, because these algorithms are also being used to tightly structure the work that they do on these platforms, which limits their control over time. So, for example, one of my participants, Mutoni, said, once I clock in, I cannot stop my tasks until I complete the assigned tasks. I have to meet the deadline. And so you can see this instance creates pressure and reduces the flexibility that they have. Now, wrapping up this study, to what extent does the resource portfolio of translators support in the long and in the short term? In the short term, primarily, translators stay active using platforms like LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and also YouTube to work, to learn, and also to share opportunities amongst themselves. And these channels, it works for now, but we also have to recognize that these are fragile as well, and they're easily disrupted. If, for example, if there's an health issue, it's easy to be disrupted. In the longer term, this is definitely not enough because when you're talking about key resources like certifications, which are quite expensive, when you're looking at stable professional networks, they are sometimes they're often inaccessible due to maybe location or limited support as well. And so the overall key point is this, that translators do have agency, but it's very unstable. So it works in the short term through the individual efforts, but it breaks down over time because the broader system does not always support it. Now, moving on to my second question, looking at the implications of non-locally designed CAT tools in this case. I employed a mixed method design, combining survey and follow-up interview as well. I worked with 13 Kenyan translators who regularly use CAT tools in their work as well. And the choice for the survey was to sort of provide a much more breadth by identifying to figure out the general patterns of the CAT to use by translators. And the follow-up interview helped me dig deeper into the context in which they were talking about. For analysis, I used Andre Brock's critical technocultural discourse analysis, also called CTDA. So when I say CTDA, it's Andre Brock's critical technocultural discourse analysis, which is very useful for examining how technologies are shaped by the power, the culture, and the design, as well as the user's experience. And so, particularly within this study, it is important because the car tools in Kenya, we know that they are Western design systems and they are used in different linguistic contexts. Now, back to my findings, and based on these dimensions, particularly these three dimensions, and through the lens of CTDA, here are some of the fundamental points from each dimension. The first one I would like to talk about is the language hierarchy built into the design of CAT tools. And the majority of CAT tools systems, they are developed around English and other global North languages. And this influences every part of how the CAT tool functions. The interface is usually in English, which is not surprising, which means Swahili translators must constantly operate in a second language while working or while doing their translation work. And on top of that, when you look at the terminology database, it often has some limited Swahili entries. So translators cannot rely on this existing CAT system suggestions, and instead they have to work or create or adapt terms by themselves. And so even when you even push it a bit further with the translation memories, one of the main efficiency or one of the main purported functions of CAT tools does not even work. It works, much more for higher resource languages. So which means that a Swahili translator uh, does not have enough storage in order for them to draw from. And so in practice, the system makes less supportive and places the workload much more on the translators. And moving on into the cultural aspect of things, there is a loss of cultural and linguistic meaning. So when you're looking at CAT tools in this instance, CAT tools are designed primarily to prioritize direct equivalency. Again, when you're looking at the structure of English language and Swahili, it's not direct. You cannot directly translate them because they do have their structures as well. Now, as a result of this, local terms, for example, in Kenya, if you've heard about the word Harambe, are reduced to simply English equivalents. And in some cases, this translation may be technical correct, but I think the issue here is they strip away the cultural and the social meaning attached to these expressions. And lastly, talking about the labor and the productivity burden here, which is largely created also by these CAT tools. And often at times you see these translators, they spend a lot of time correcting system generated errors by the CAT tools, which slows down their workflow. And at the same time, they take on additional invisible work. So, for example, they tend to build manual personal glossaries. So they try to maintain specific words in Swahili, and in addition to that, they tend to form a little bit of community or online community and share among themselves. And this is um, a, a pure approach to adaptation and innovation if you look at it from that sense. And in addition to that, majority of these CAT tools are expensive. So for instance, an annual subscription of a CAT tool ranges from $384 to 394, which is equivalent to about 49,000 to 51,000 Kenyan shillings as well. So what are the implications of these non-locally designed CAT tools? We know that CAT tools are designed for dominant languages like English, which means Swahili speakers are working with tools that weren't built for them. The cultural meaning gets flattened, expressions lose their depth, and the gaps left behind becomes the translator's problem to fix. And so, as we can see from this, it does reflect existing inequalities and directly transfer costs directly to the people it was supposed to help initially. And now moving on to the my third research question, I used a three-phase mixed method design, combining interviews, task-based experiments, and also evaluation using the HOPE framework. And I chose this approach to understand both how the translators use generative AI in practice and how AI generated translations compared to human translations as well. So in this case, when I say generative AI, I specifically use ChatGPT for this experiment or for this study particularly. And so this study involved 8 Kenyan gig translators who regularly use generative AI in their daily workflow. The second phase was a translation experiment where both the translators and the generative AI output, so by ChatGPT, translated a set of English sentences and they were made directly to compare, and the human translators compared these outputs side by side. And the final phase used the HOPE framework, which is a human-centered evaluation approach based on professional post-editing practices as well. So to talk a little bit about the findings here, across the three areas here, the findings point in a similar direction. So, and by this I mean that Gen AI still struggles, or generative AI still struggles with Swahili translation in very important ways. So the first aspect I would like to talk about is the accuracy. And accuracy was actually the biggest concern for translators, right? ChatGPT in this case, maybe we can substitute generative AI for ChatGPT, can translate words, but it does not always understand the meaning behind them. And so when Swahili requires grammar or context that English does not clearly provide, AI, in this case, you often see that AI will just guess and produce an output. In other situation, the more complex a sentence is, the lesser it's able to give a much more accurate output. And this is very important, especially when you're talking about the accuracy of in this case, ChatGPT. Then there's fluency, and the fluency is actually a tricky one because translations often attempt these translations produce smooth and natural text, and they often seem like it's correct, but this can also be misleading as well. And for example, there's this concept of false fluency. So it looks right, it sounds right, but then, to an average or to a non-Swahili speaker, it might look correct, but there are errors underneath, and these are the errors that make this output not as fluent as it should be. And finally, there's a cultural aspect where there's a structural aspect, the cultural aspect where AI struggles the most. And a majority, or I say all my participants did mention that generative AI does not understand cultural context. It can process language patterns, but it cannot fully understand what certain words mean by using them. So, for example, again, previously when I talked about Harambe, for example, right, it does strip away some of the cultural meanings, and it goes beyond literal translation as well. And so, what does this study mean? First, AI cannot replace human translators because it lacks context, judgment, and cultural understanding. Secondly, fluency can be misleading. So, as smooth as language may look or sound, it still contains hidden errors. The third one is post-editing is essential to ensure accuracy and restore the meaning. And finally, I think the future is hybrid. AI supporting the speed while humans ensure meaning, depth, and cultural context. Now, moving into my applied section of my dissertation, which was a community-centered approach to AI curation. And this project emerged from interviews with translators in Kenya, where a recurring issue became very clear. And the issue was English terms still lack established Swahili equivalents, which most of the translators said that it produced inconsistent translation. And so to respond to this, I developed a co-participatory design project in Nairobi, Kenya, grounded in local context. The project brought about professional translators, linguists, and academics to collaborate and create Swahili equivalents for these missing terms. And in total, 18 volunteers participated and we curated over 5,000 terms, which were reviewed, validated, and published in open access. But there is something important, much more important, that carried me through this process. And it was not only the resources itself or the resource itself, but the act of building what this dataset represented. And in many ways, this work reflects the late Ngugi wa Thiong'o's emphasis on language as central to decolonization. Preserving and strengthening African language is not separate from development. It is also part of reclaiming cultural knowledge and intellectual space. So, but as at the time that I was working on this project, I found Olufemi Taiwo's idea of constructive decolonization especially useful for thinking through this project. The argument that shifts the conversation from documenting what colonialism disrupted to actively building what the community needs in the present. And that perspective was what shaped this project. Here is a snapshot of what the project looks like, and you can head over to swahiliverseproject.com for much more information on what we did. So gradually winding down my presentation, I would say there's a general point to be made here, and it is that people that are most affected by language technologies are often the least involved in shaping them. The systems are designed by developers, institutions, and platforms, but the burden of dealing with cultural and the linguistic gaps fall on the users themselves. So when you're looking at gig workers in Kenya, that burden is very visible. And freelance translators or gig workers are not just the users of these tools, they're also the human layer that corrects what these tools get wrong as well. So moving also, in terms of my contribution, in terms of my theoretical contribution to the field, I extended the choice framework by Dorothy Klein, which I named the labor choice framework. And this extends this to the gig work that I'm currently looking at in Kenya, where I introduce platform algorithms where they control the visibility, AI reshapes the expertise, and the digital systems structure. So, more specifically, the framework was updated by adding the algorithm structure, as you can see on the screen, as sort of a gatekeeping layer in a way, treating AI as a structural force, shaping what counts as skills, what counts as judgment, and labor-specific uh, incorporating labor-specific resources as well. So in this case, the training resources in Kenya, the credentialing resources, and also the reputation resources were also added to the resource portfolio specific to Kenyan translators. And so every translator I spoke to, they were working hard, they were trying to adapt, and they were trying to push forward. But the systems around them were not built for them. And that gap is the finding. These translators are often motivated, they're adaptive and they're committed, but the operating systems were just never designed for their language and their context and their advancements as well. And so finally, before I conclude, here are some key takeaways from my work that I think they're clear. The first one is that the absence of African languages in language technologies is not accidental. It reflects design choices about which languages matter and which are prioritized. Human post-editing is not optional. It is essential for ensuring accuracy, meaning, and cultural grounding. And the solution is not simply more technology, but better accountability to communities whose language and livelihoods are directly affected. And finally, there's a need to build genuinely localized tools and not just adapted versions of Western systems. But these tools design, we must look at it from developing it from the ground up. And then we must think about developing it from the ground up and also considering the context in mind as well. Thank you very much for listening.
You can unmute and clap if that's your choice, or virtual clap. Yinka, this was a fantastic presentation, and I'm learning things every time you present it, truly. And what a wonderful set of slides and visualizations. I want to emphasize that for you all to think kind of deeply about Yinka's work here. He started at the iSchool 6 years ago, I believe, coming from a political science background, specializing in qualitative analysis through surveys mostly, and prioritizing quantitative analysis, quantitative social sciences. In this project, he has adopted the methods of qualitative research. He spent years learning Swahili as a native-born Nigerian. He was already fluent in several local languages, including English. And so to adopt a new language, in the middle of his life was a great challenge, and also represented a tremendous growth area intellectually, I think, for this project. And I'm really proud of this research project at the iSchool and our partnerships in African cultural studies. I'm not sure we need to. Should we break out, Alan? I think we can start with the questions.
I'm happy to start asking questions if that's cool by the other committee members.
Absolutely. Let's go.
I see Professor Katenji's here to join the rotation.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Alan. I was having some challenges, but I was able to log in. Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Great to see you. Peter Katenji, Professor Peter Katenji is joining us from Kenya. And as the project highlights, right, there's also inequity in internet access between the global north and the global south, or in Africa in particular. So that is the reality we're dealing with. But also, we've made good on this opportunity as well through Zoom. So Alan, please lead us off with your question.
Yeah, so Yinka, thank you for the presentation. I've enjoyed seeing this work evolve over a few years now, and we've had a lot of different discussions about, your conceptual apparatus of your dissertation is. I want to pursue something a little different than some of the stuff we've discussed before, because I think it warrants it. You've dealt with a lot of the early questions that I had very effectively. So this may sound a little new to you, but I think it should be interesting. And what I'd like to do is think a little bit about the difference in development goals writ large, like at a sort of a macro level, population level maybe, and the lives of people engaged in gig work, right? So we talk about, you have some very nice stuff about structures that affect the nature of gig work. You talk about the relative importance of linguistic hierarchies and financial resources. And those might play out differently depending whether you're talking about individuals or whether you're talking about something much broader. And so what I would like you to do, and this is going to require you thinking a little bit on the fly, maybe a little bit creative, is to walk me through the experience of one of your research subjects, one of the people you interviewed. They're a gig worker. They may have been a gig worker before the access to ChatGPT for translation. And I wonder if you could walk me through what this looks like from their perspective as they take on a particular project, maybe as their career unfolds over time, and what they're encountering along the way. Now, this isn't just I want a little bit of a story here, but I have a reason for this. I want to follow up with a question about some conceptual issues. But hopefully you'll entertain me here, or you'll tell me the story that can help me think through these things.
Thank you, Professor Alan, for your question. I appreciate it. So my participants, they were a mix of, I can categorize them into two specifically. You have the experienced gig translators or the experienced translators who are also in the gig force. And you also have the non-experienced folks who are just joining, right? So these are two separate things. And for a typical experienced translator, right, when the way they get work is still a bit traditional, but at the same time, they still utilize these informal networks as well in order to supplement. So they can get jobs via recommendation, and via the platform sometimes as well. And when you look at the other side, the second category of the non-experienced translators, often at times you see that they mostly rely on the informal, their peer networks essentially, because there are a lot of issues and there are a lot of reasons why that is so, because some of them are just coming out of school. Um, some of them are just, just there's essentially nothing to do, and this is an avenue for them to work. And so most of them do not understand CAT tools. They don't know how to use CAT tools. Some of them have never heard about CAT tools before. And generative AI is there, it's ChatGPT and so on and so forth. And so you have these newer factors coming in. And so the way they approach, their ultimate goal, again, which is similar, their goal or their development goal is, okay, I just want to have something doing. I want to make a living at the end of the day. That's a general end goal. But how are they going to get to that end goal? I think that is where the choices are limited and limited, either limited or expanded.
Okay, so this is actually really helpful. I like this distinction. You've got some people who've been doing this for a long time. They've developed some professional skills and networks, and they can probably work at a fairly advanced intellectual level, right? In terms of nuance, in terms of breadth of project and complexity of project, and then other people who are picking up work and may not be able to do it at that level because they're early on in their careers. And so that's the thing, the kind of thing I want to focus on, and this gets down to the concept of agency. So you had a really nice slide kind of towards the end. I won't ask you to call back up the slides, but describing range of choice and type of project and thing like that. But I think there's this issue of quality of choice and maybe depth of agency that I think is really important here, right? So it may be that the agency is even more complicated. Now you've complexified it a lot, but I think like the professional may have increased opportunities because ChatGPT flattens language or maybe not, I don't know. But I think there's a question there. And I think there's also an issue of ChatGPT and other technologies may make certain kinds of local agency, may create certain sorts of agency, certain opportunities to exercise agency among people who are less professionalized, right? Less less advanced in their career, right? So they can actually get some work that they couldn't have got otherwise. So one thing, I wonder whether quality of agency, able to sort of exercise one's capacity at very advanced levels, like you have the opportunity to engage in in-depth research, whereas other people may not, and that's an important difference. But I also wonder about global versus local agency. So access to technologies may give people choice, but in a more tightly constrained environment, right? Like, yeah, there's lots of opportunity for gig work, but not a lot of it is very satisfying or very high paying, right? So I'd encourage a little bit of more, yeah, adding some components to agency there. And I'm wondering, and so there is a question here. I'm wondering if you have in your interviews encountered that kind of distinction. Like, yeah, I've got lots of work, but it's all kind of uninteresting or unsatisfying. Or, I'm able to do work, but I can't do it at my highest professional level or anything like that. I wonder if you could pick out some examples of that if you have them.
Thank you, Professor Alan. Um, so I would say that in some instances, maybe differently worded, but I would say that um, I think there was one of my participants who um, again they were able to get a job, right? They were able to get a gig job, and they used AI to more of as a first draft and to just do the job as soon as they can. And there's a reason for that because um, when most of these less professionalized translators are working, they tend to reduce their prices. So, for example, an experienced translator might charge $10 an hour. An inexperienced might bring the price to about $2 an hour, right? So this is a reality, and often at times when these lower paid workers do this job, they because they understand the economic reality that this is just a means to just get by, and so they use these tools in order for them to get by, right? And at the same time, you also have the more experienced translators as well complaining that a lot of these folks they're not doing the work that they're supposed to do, essentially, and then it limits their own opportunity because when they're charging $10 an hour, for example, they don't necessarily get the job, and so the lower priced workers get the job, and then the more experienced don't get the job, and so you can see that interaction of agency playing out in that scenario.
Yeah, interesting. So how does that, I mean, it'd be hard to see this in your research, given that this is a long-term kind of thing. You've only got a couple of years, and hopefully you'll continue this and keep looking at it over time. But does that affect the overall market and opportunity for highly skilled labor, right? Is there that macro level pressure ultimately getting um, placed on this part of the economy, those locations from that process?
Professor Allen, can you rephrase your question?
Yeah. So if the highly skilled people
Mhm.
are being priced out of this market and not able to get work because somebody can come in with ChatGPT and do a cheap but not as good translation, does that undermine the group of people, that sector of the economy of highly skilled professionals?
It's it's hard to say yes and it's hard to say no at the same time because it just depends on the context. Because the highly skilled translators are still there. They are still actively looking for work, right? They are not necessarily leaving because they're not getting the job. So it's still like a cycle of, still trying to get that job, and if they don't get the job, they try to expand their networks, or they try to, get the jobs any way they can.
Fair enough. Uh, I've asked several questions. I've always got more, so but I'd like to give other folks an opportunity here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Rebel. And we'll move to Professor Ajoke next, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Yinka. I have enjoyed reading your work and working with you on your dissertation. I want to commend your effort learning Swahili and using it on the context to make sure to make sense of your data and all the forms of data that you were able to collect, and even extend to the chapter 7 of your dissertation. So great job. So I have two questions that are interlinked, but I'll begin with the first one. So in your introduction and somewhere in your chapter 4, you were talking about professionalization, de-professionalization, which are both also linked to the idea of agency that is central to your research. And so I am curious about what this implies for the idea of certification you raised, about how gig workers find it really difficult to get certification because they have to use Western platforms and organizations to get certified. And it gives them that opportunity to broaden their reach and visibility. But at the same time, they are gig workers. They are not necessarily also categorized as professionals, because there is this concept of de-professionalization that entered into the process of translation work and what this means for gig worker. So I am curious about how you are engaging with all of the complexity of, because if I am certified and I have that certification, I am supposed to be a professional. But in actual sense, and in practice and experience, there is that experience of de-professionalization, especially in the way that they are engaging with certification and all of that. So I'm curious about what this implies for your project.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agoke, for the question. So professionalization and deprofessionalization, as you mentioned, these are theoretically, right? We know professionalization, like you're trained or you're skilled at something. Deprofessionalization is taking that out. And when you're applying it within the context of these gig workers in Kenya, it's also, I see it's more as a muddy space as well, because within these gig workers, you have some that are professionalized and some that are not as professionalized as others. And so they occupy this space together. Now, when you're talking about the certification, for example, just because I have a certification does not mean that, I'm privy to a certain job. It's not guaranteed for me.
Mm.
But on the other end, if I'm deprofessionalized, if I'm not a skilled worker and can still get a job, right, using my informal network. So the issue of professionalization or deprofessionalization here does not necessarily count, because it's more of everyone in a pool and we are trying to get or achieve something. And so whatever that thing is, however you get to it, using your resource portfolio. So for example, um, you know, do I have education? Does the client feel that having a bachelor's or a master's, is it worthy for the clients to give me the job? Or could it be a case of, um, again, like we're talking now, like about the certification, right? In practice, it's not useful if you think about it, right? Because getting an American certification to translate Swahili does not necessarily work. But the fact that I do have that certification might give a client that confidence of doing that. And in other cases, it might just be word of mouth for the deprofessionalized settings, like, oh, this person worked for me, worked on this textbook and did this amazing work. The person might not necessarily have a certification, but by yeah, referrals, they're able to get a job. So it's it's a complex scenario, but at the end of the day, I think it's based on individuality as well when we're talking about it.
So it seems to me that certification, professionalization, deprofessionalization, all of these are not necessarily even linked to agency. So it seems that gig workers are constructing agency for themselves. And that leads to my next question about the way you're thinking about development. Alan talked about macro level development, and but specifically, I'm linking this towards the conclusion of your paper, of your dissertation, and the significance of your work for development. So it seems to me that you are thinking about development in relation to what needs to be done, rethinking platforms, technology that are culturally relevant and that matters for context, which is great. But I'm also really wondering if you think of gig itself, the way it is in Kenya right now, as development. Because the work that they are doing, that all of these people are doing, and linking back to the way you have framed agency in your work, seems to enhance the affordances and mobility within the network of workers within Kenya. And in some way, it has distinctively make Kenya a particular hub for gig work, Swahili English translation, and all of the evidence of the work that we are seeing going on. And so I am seeing that in the way you are wrapping up your work, you seem to have left out the ongoing work as development itself. So development is not just what is envisioned. Development is also what is ongoing. And so perhaps it will be useful to integrate this into your conclusion and really acknowledge the existing work as development, even though there is other things that you're also considering. I'll pause for others to join the conversation.
Yinka, I don't know if you would like to make a comment about that before we move on to the next set of questions. You're muted right now.
Yes, real quick. Thank you, Professor Esther. So I would say, to your question, Professor Agoke, I think that's a valid point, and I think the way I think about this this gig or gig workers, within the reasoning or the context of development is much more that they do carry some knowledge, and this knowledge they carry, they bring it into the gig economy as a whole. So, and as you've rightly mentioned, I think this knowledge doesn't stop being developmental just because it's not traditional employment, right? It's much more than just traditional employment, and the fact that it's gone much more, within the digital platform space. um, Development is not a location essentially; it's more of a process. So, and I see that process happening. So whether formal institution acknowledge these gig workers or not, I still think the knowledge I bring in is still adding to that developmental conversation.
Thank you for the comments. We have been going for about an hour now, and what I would like to do is just have a quick breakout of the committee into our breakout room, and maybe we'll come back with a few more questions. I think it'll be good. if anybody needs to take a bio break, and we can just get a breather before the next set of questions here. So what I'm going to do is put the committee into a breakout room and invite everyone else to take just a few minutes to have a bio break here. So, okay. And transfer to room. Who? Transfer who? Tools. Well, I have to figure out how to do a. Alan, can you do a breakout room for us?
You're putting me on the spot. I'll try.
I'm clicking things and it's not working for me for some reason. Nothing's working here.
All right, I think I've got it.
Transfer to. Oh, that's not what I want to do. I can claim the host.
I'm having a little trouble here.
Yeah, I'm trying some things here. Waiting room, lock meeting, chat.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. And you're still here, Alan.
Yeah, I couldn't assign myself. I think as the assigner, I'm able to join one. Oh, oh wait, I assigned Inca to the wrong place. To
Oh, that's right. He wasn't in.
you and yeah, I can't assign myself.
Okay. Change host.
I don't understand what's going on.
Just 1 second.
Hey, Reg, are you here?
Second. Let's get Alan to the room. How do we do that?
Yeah, I don't know how to
Are we
do
making him?
it's letting me. Oh, I got it. I'm joining now.
Okay. Great. Okay, as people are coming in, again, I just want to reiterate the protocols here. Everyone who is not on the committee should be video off and muted for the second section here. And you may want to spotlight Yinka or adjust your Zoom settings appropriately. And thank you all for being here with us today. We'll continue with the questions that the committee has for Yinka's dissertation here. And Professor Githinji, if you will, lead us off on the second round of questions for the PhD candidate.
Thank you so much, Professor Royston. And I hope that Mr. Yinka can hear me.
Yes, I can, Prof. Gittinji.
Thank you so much. And I would like to congratulate you for what you have achieved so far and good presentation. I know we have interacted about your project, and it's a great project. It's something that we have not seen this kind of work being done here in Kenya. So when you have this kind of contribution, I think it's a major thing. Uh, my issue here is regards the resource portfolio that you have talked about, mostly on chapter 4. And because this actually also impacts on what you talk about the agency of these people and whether they are able to perform their gig work and profit from it. I can talk about the resources that you have listed, 11 resources in your research. And what, according to you, do you consider as the most important? Because not all of them were dealt with, but there are certainly some resources that you found these are the key in terms of my research as far as these gig workers are concerned. So I'd like you to expand a little bit on like 3 of the most important resources that you'd like to talk about in your research.
Thank you, Professor Gisinji, for the question. So the first resource, I think it's really, really important for these gig workers. The first one will be the social resources, so their networks, for example. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in order for an avenue for these gig translators to get job would be through their peers and mentors, and so on and so forth. So that is an important avenue. The second one I would talk about is the information resources. So, where they get their information from. So, for example, social media, for example, YouTube for learning, um, professional platforms, and so on and so forth. So, because if they're not able to learn about a specific, or if they're not able to train themselves, or if they're not able to self-teach themselves on specific things, then there's no way they can, improve and expand their knowledge on what they'll be working on. And the last one I would like to mention, although it's surprising, but I would probably say psychological resources. And the reason why I'm saying this is because so there are 2 seasons for translators or for gig workers, but more specific to my research, let me just stick to the gig workers. There's the off season and there's the on season as well. And during the on season, depending on the flow of work that's coming in, right, an individual may be able to reasonably fare well. But then the struggle comes during the off season because there are no jobs coming, no way to earn income. And typically what the translators usually do is to try to get a second job temporarily. And that is hard because already they're moving onto digital platforms to find jobs. So there is it makes it much more harder to go back to the traditional way of finding jobs. And often at times, these psychological resources plays into, am I going to be motivated to move forward, or is this going to take me down? And this is also connected to time, for example, because the more uh, so the psychological resource is also connected to time because often at times when they are working on projects, and when the algorithms are sort of restricting these gig workers from doing certain things, or restricting their times, you often find out that, the psychological resources, especially in situations where they get locked out of the interface and they're not able to work and they lose the job eventually. And in some cases, they might even lose the money, or they might not get paid because something happened, the algorithm did something wrong. And in such cases, the psychological resources has to come and sort of, it serves as either a motivator or a demotivator for the gig workers as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And just a quick follow-up on that before I ask the other question is that if we have this improvement of the resources that the gig translators have, um, is there any concern that if we improve the resources that we can control, then they drive themselves into irrelevance, something that we have always been talking about, the coming of machines are driving people out of work. So here we are advocating for them to control resources, but at the same time, if we improve these resources, then it means that even the people who give them jobs might not need them at all. So does this not seem to negate the real need for these resources?
I mean, thank you, Professor Gitinje, for the follow-up. I think it depends on how it's the perspective, talking about, how we see these things. For example, um, when we're talking about resource, right, improving their capabilities, right? And in conversation with, for example, AI, because in my third study, it came out that, for example, even if AI is replacing most of this translation work, for example, AI still lacks that cultural context and understanding. And majority of the time, human translators still have to go back and make edits. And there was an instance, just to quickly talk about an instance with one of my translators, and he made mention that whenever a client contracts them or contracts, gig workers, they often tend to go for the lowest priced gig worker because of obvious reasons. They want to save money. But at the end of the day, what happens is because the work is subpar and it's not up to the level that it should be, then they also come back to the experienced gig translators and then give them the same work in order for them to repair and do some corrections on. And so we can say that in this instance, even though you know some people might prefer to use AI for their work, that human presence is still needed to be able to correct and edit some of these outputs as well. And so um, the resources is important, especially when you're talking about the AI literacy and AI training, right? We still need to improve the capacity of workers in order for them to be able to correctively and um, um, you know capably handle some of this repaired work as well.
Mhm. Yeah, let me just ask this last question. And this now refers to specific data. Probably, I don't know whether you might recall when you're talking about the data that works on Elizabeth, for instance. We look that Elizabeth scores highly. It was also in your slides, right?
Yes.
And you also find Elias is kind of like low. So in terms of is there anything that you found in terms of the resource portfolio of these two people that we can attribute to this disparity?
Yes, thank you, Professor Gettinger, for the question. And I think this is a typical case of experienced geek translator versus you know, less experienced geek translators. And Elizabeth scored accuracy as 5, which is the best, and scored fluency as 4, and cultural appropriateness as 4 as well. These are all high scores. And Elizabeth is fairly a young gig worker as well, compared to Elias. Elias is, I think Elias is in the mid 40s, I think, just the profile of the translator, and they have more than 5 years, 6 years of experience translating. And so you can see the difference in the level of experience they have and how they also approach generative AI tools as well.
Okay, yeah, just as a final, because this is very quick,
Yes.
you in the resource portfolio, you have that table, you have the column on gender, and I was wondering whether that was actually necessary to include it there, because there is nothing that you have shown in terms of the profiles that this gender plays a role at all. That's just a quick response.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Professor Gitinji. So, one of the good things about the choice framework is the Dorothy Klein says that this framework can be adaptable and, adopted as needed, right? So not all aspects of the framework needs to be, word for word. So in this case, the age, the gender, the age, the ethnicity wasn't really a big factor when I was looking at the gig workers in Kenya.
Okay, thank you. I think I can stop there, Professor Ralston. We can, if there's any other opportunity, I can ask, but for now, I think I'm satisfied.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Githinji. Again, dealing with technical conditions, having to be off camera sometimes is the best way to facilitate internet access globally, especially where internet bandwidth between countries is limited. And again, thank you for joining us from Kenya. Yinka, there are so many great points of entry that we can have about this project. I really appreciate Professor Ajoke and Rebel's intervention to say what is the how can these platforms impact development not only at a macro level but at a personal level, right? And can we see some of these platforms and tools or Chat GPT as a tool, right, being forms of underdevelopment, right? Underdevelopment, advancing underdevelopment as we classically understand that from a dependency theory within development work, right? So that's certainly something to explore. What I'm thinking more specifically about is your Swahili project, the Swahili verse project, which seemed to intervene both organically and experimentally in that space, right? It attempted to create an entire glossary, right, a codex, if you will, for professional terms that weren't being translated into Swahili or coming to a consensus about what those terms were in and of themselves. I want you to talk a little bit more about that project if you can, and the outputs of that project. How were people? How did it develop, and how did people begin to use this new glossary? And maybe I'm simplifying it by just calling it an online dictionary or online codex, if you will.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Austin, for your comments as well. So this project, which I called Swahili Verse, like you rightly said, stemmed from the issues of some Swahili terms not having meanings, right? They do have the English terms, but not having the equivalent in Swahili. And the approach to this project was mostly, like I also iterated previously, bringing a band of 18 volunteers and professionals to work on this project. And the protocol, because we had to be much more deliberate because the methodology matters the most. Because if someone was to look at the project and ask questions, it was important for us to be able to definitively tell them that this is how we did it, specifically the how, rather than this is what we did. And the process was mostly, you know, identifying which terms we're going to use. So this was much more of a natural process in which we asked all the 18 volunteers to naturally, and not using any digital tools, to come up with words they do not know in Swahili. And so that was the first stage. The second stage was now compiling all these words together. And then the third stage was much more about reviewing these words and then collaborating on it. So what happened was, during our workshop in Nairobi, we we brought together all the 18 volunteers, and we broke them into groups of threes, I think threes to fours. And within the groups, we had certain resources that they had to use just to ensure consistency amongst amongst all the groups. And so they discussed about certain words, and then at the end of the discussion, they agreed upon a central meaning for those terms. And finally, the digitization was uploaded on the website, and which is free for everybody to access. It's open access. And in addition to that, we've also created social media spaces as well, on Facebook as well, which has about 4,000 subscribers, and also TikTok as well. And people are engaging with the materials on it.
Yeah. And so these outputs, are people deliberating in these spaces, in the social media spaces, about terms that are equivalent, for, I guess, scientific and professional terms, right, in Western languages? Um, there's so many questions I could ask you, right? If it's just English, that's one thing, but I'm sure, people, particularly in diaspora settings, are encountering, the professional world has multilingual technical concepts sometimes, right? So are these deliberated into the space, in the social media space, and how are they incorporated into the website?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Oyston. And what we've seen so far has been, a post might have several comments on a specific word. So these meanings are still being deliberated on social media as well. And often at times, a post might go on and say, is it A versus B, which is correct? And you see people having different answers, and also saying, no, this is what it should be because of X, because of Y. And others also having that conversation of this, it should be X rather than Y. So there is still that the meaning is still being deliberated, right, by the people who engage on social media as well.
And then finally, how this is an agentive project, right? And it emerged. I'm not sure all the details of how it emerged, but one of my fears, and probably the fears that many people have about doing this in the age of LLMs, is that, okay, we've developed a community, a grounded, contextualized vocabulary, set of vocabulary, vernacular, to professional words, to Swahili. Now the agency of anybody who's trying to translate can be enhanced, because it's online and it likely will be crawled by LLMs. And so that labor that you've done to create both a community of practice, but
Mhm.
also a community of knowledge. The knowledge of that community is now being accessed, and incorporated into Chat GPT or Gemini or what have you, right?
Mhm.
What are the thoughts about that? How do the participants understand? Are they hoping for that level of impact, or are they worried about their labor not being, acknowledged, and the platforms that ultimately use this undervaluing, devaluing their labor?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Austin. So I think one of the initial consideration and my fear, like you rightly mentioned, was the possibility of web scraping. And this was highly considered at the beginning. And if you check out the website, folks are so there's a enhanced security measure that does not allow that to happen. So people can copy and paste, and when you try to web scrape it, it does not respond to that request. So that's an extra security measure that's been considered on the websites itself.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure. So there is a sense of ownership, let's say. Is there a sense of proprietariness around this? I mean, at the same time, you would think that people are also interested in getting these concepts out there, wider, right? Or is there a monetization of this project in some kind of way?
Uh, yeah, thank you, Professor Austin, for the question. Um, yeah, the project is not monetized in any way, just because this is much more a community-centered project, and I think ethically it would be, um, you know, at this point, it does not fit that purpose of monetization.
Mhm.
And if that would be considered in the future, then it would mean that the decision would also be uh, a community approach decision as well, not just made by myself, but also considering the folks who helped us create everything and having a decision, a central decision, and not just a sole decision on that.
And so, how are the agreements about how these your words will used? It seems like if you are to allow translation corpuses to incorporate the work of the Swahili verse, that would enhance the work of translation, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't that seem? Isn't that also a goal of the project?
Yes, yes, it's also a goal by, when you're thinking about local developers, for example, right? They need this data to be able to create the tools. And so um, we're open to um, giving out this data to local development, specifically, within the continent, just so to enhance their work as well. In some cases, which is still not, it hasn't been discussed, but there are some sort of deliberations on that. If other companies come, probably foreign-owned companies come with the proposal for the data, I think um, the thought process, still not yet implemented, but the thought process is um, compensating the community um, for their work,
Yeah.
and also, yeah, and so that's how um, it's been thought, but it hasn't been fleshed out yet.
Okay, great. Well, maybe there can be some ideas around Wikipedia, common licenses, common use licenses, and I think it's also worth exploring the ways in which monetization could, further develop the capacities of the project itself. Obviously, it emerges as a scholarly project, which is not always driven by profit, but in certain contexts monetization can protect the copyright, the intellectual work as well, right? So that should be considered.
Okay.
Uh, All right, thank you very much. I think we want to open it up for the community, for the audience here, any members of the academic and the community here, right? A question that you have about Yinka's work, um, we very much love to hear from any input uh, that people have. And you can unmute yourself. If you can't, you can also sorry, enter something into the chat if that's easier, an easier way for you to interact as well. I'll take the silence just to ask maybe then my last question, which I think is really, I think Adiola would appreciate this question as well. Could you tell us how this project in particular, and not this dissertation research, helped you as a Swahili learner, right? Like as somebody who is going to advance and continue to develop as a speaker and as a researcher, it's more than, let's say, an intellectual project, right? I imagine that thinking about how people translate and learn and how people organize those translations uh, enhances your own capacity, right? Your own capabilities, right? So,
Mm.
um, could you speak more about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof, for the question. So I think as a researcher, first and foremost, I think when you're approaching that context, especially when you're going to a different environment for research, and language is always something that that's uniting. And what I my experience learning Swahili, even though not at advanced stage yet, but the ability for me to converse, in a very reasonable way for people to understand helped me, because he also built some trust amongst some of my, uh, with all of my participants as well. And I think approaching it, you know, trying to speak Swahili when I first engage with my participants sort of made them feel a bit confident, and they felt that I was genuinely interested in this research. And I think that was, really important to me. Not just coming to do research and just leaving, but actually invested in what I'm doing and also invested in the language as well. So I would say that has been, you know, that has been a very critical point of my engagement in Kenya and with Swahili, the Swahili language as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine, building trust is essential. Adiola, looks like you want to say something.
Yes, yes. So I really, really like that part of your research that you went into that context with the language as part of the tools of integration into that ethnographic space and interacting with your participants and building off of that resource to really expand on your analysis. And one thing that it's just one small thing, but I'm very curious about it, is the relationship between the standard Swahili and the variations. So because in your resource portfolio, you talked about, some deliberations about what variation matters and what this implies for the standard Swahili, especially because those words are not even in the standard Swahili, for example.
Mhm.
And in reality, the standard and the variations would always coexist. So
Mhm.
what is your perspective on this, especially because you are already building an archive, right? And it's particularly tied to your own intellectual production and your engagement with that context. So I want to just hear your perspective about the standard versus the variation and what this implies for your own project, especially the archival document
Mhm.
you're putting together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Agoke. So I think the issue of standardized and dialects is, I mean, if Professor Gitinji can attest to this, it's a long conversation.
Mhm.
Um, at the moment, so with the Swahiliverse project, there's an ongoing project currently curating dialectical Swahili. So I think we're looking at there's a Kimvita, there's uh, I can't quite remember all we have, but I think about 4 to 5 Swahili dialects right now, curating some of these things. And so the next step after curate, curating this equivalent words that are now existing in Swahili is to now move further to the dialect side of things. And the overall goal of the Swahiliverse project is to create niche data. So not necessarily reproducing existing data, but going into spaces where these, these data are not yet been digitized, or people are not just paying attention to it. So subsequently, in a few months, we should have some form of dialectical data in about 4 to 5 dialects as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yinka, we're going to now move to some deliberations, the committee. And if Alan, you could move the committee to a breakout room, and we should join you, have some discussions, and then we'll join you shortly. Rejoin this conversation shortly. So. And so everyone else, please stick around for the exciting conclusion. Okay. I'm just going to wait for everyone to join. I'll review. We have 8 participants. Okay, here we go. People are coming back in. Yep. Wonderful. Yes, you can. Let's see how many we have now. Okay. 13. And the numbers keep rising. And so this is probably a good time. You can take off your, I'll admit some more people. You can turn on your camera as we are now going to congratulate and welcome our newest PhD in the iSchool, Yinka Ajibola, Victor Yinka Ola Yinka Ajibola, Doctor Ola Yinka Victor Ajibola. Congratulations, you've passed the Rubicon, and we are very excited to welcome you into the field as a PhD, Doctor of Philosophy and Information, and of course, African Cultural Studies minor. Congratulations. You can unmute to clap if you like, or just play with all the doodads here.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to say I'm grateful to my dissertation committee for your guidance and support over the past few years. I owe you an acknowledgement, which I'll be sending out as well, as I get closer to the final revision being done. In addition, I would like to thank everyone who made it and has been supportive, friends, family, the high school as well. I'm really grateful for your support over the years, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. Let's give you a little feedback though before we cut the cake. Okay. So we thought this was a great presentation. In general, this is some of the best interdisciplinary work we've seen in the iSchool and in African Cultural Studies, right? Which are my 2 departments, Adiola and Professor Rubel in the Information School. International work, right? Interdisciplinary work. Multidisciplinary research skills, language, qualitative research, looking at metrics, right? And then developing a website and a community engaged project, right? This is, I think, a great model for some very engaged work that's on the cutting edge, doing development in the global south, right? Or the global majority as we're beginning to think about it, rethink about it, right? And so we want those stories. So some suggestions for you in general. I think the presentation focused heavily on your methods, your theory, and you did the intellectual work, right? But I think in presenting the work forward, you really need to bring some of the personal stories, bring some of the triumphs and the challenges out there of your interlocutors, of your research respondents, right? And also telling a story about the new theory as well, right? You need to be able to tell that story about how your theory emerges and how it emerged from your work itself. That'll be very important. And so you'll do that not only on the dais or in lectures, but also in venues and in publications, right? And so we're very interested in helping you see how each of the chapters can be published, like where can they be published, right? Different development journals, different information studies journals, different African studies journals, international studies, right? Obviously, each of the venues in linguistics, right? Sociolinguistics. Each of the venues will have a different set of interests around what the audience or the readers there want. And so you have this incredible breadth, though. And so that is an asset, right? And you should also be able to translate that for any potential future employers, right? Like, I'm an ethnographer. I do data analysis in this kind of way, right? I work in an international context. I come from an international context. I speak multiple languages, right? And so those academic publications that will bolster your work you should narrow in on depth, depending on, let's say, the chapter on AI and ChatGPT, or the chapter on CAT tools, right? Um, each of those uh, focuses will find a particular academic venue. And then I think conceptually, there are some things we'd like to see added to the final draft, particularly around this question of agency and development. We do see the story of the translators and themselves acquiring a strong sense of agency through the use and the adaptation, right? The local innovation that's happening here. I think that's something that you need to bring up a little bit more, right? And in the conclusion, very tie the notion of local adoption or localization from your interlocutors themselves, not simply from like a macro level down, but from the ground up as well, a local adoption, and how that adds a dimension to their own personal agencies, right? And also to talk about, address some of the edge cases, right? Some of the edge cases where translators were not as good as machine translation should be explored. What does that mean, right? Especially within the de-professionalization content, right? I think those are areas to explore, as well as the idea of augmentation, right? What does the augmented translator's life look like? But as you can see, this is so conceptually rich, deep, long, rewarding work, as any PhD project should be. And we're very proud of you. So one more round of applause, and microphones off for Yinka.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor and Dissertation Committee, for the feedback. I will be taking, as per next steps, I'll be including your feedbacks in the final version of our manuscript. Thank you, everybody, and I'm excited to
Yes.
see.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I'm so excited to see a big community here, and some of our PhD, fantastic high school PhD students, candidates, graduates. And I will see you tomorrow at the Cole Center and at the iSchool to toast and celebrate. Congratulations, Dr. Ajibola.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good work, Yinka.
Thank you, Professor Allen. Appreciate it.
Dr. Ajibola.
Thank you, Professor Agoke.
We'll see you tomorrow at the reception.
Yes, I'll be there.
All right, good. I'll look forward to that.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. I have to leave to another one, but thank you, everybody, for coming out.
Yes, and thanks
Thank
once
you.
again. Thank you,
Yeah.
and thank you, Dr. Kathinji, for joining us and participating in this dissertation process. It's a gift to us as well. We look forward to continue to connect with you.
Absolutely.
Unity and congratulations, Dr. Ajibola.
Thank you, Professor Gitinji. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, be well. See you
All right.
tomorrow.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.